June 1989, Las Vegas. A 14-year-old girl set out on her usual walk to school, but she never arrived. Hours later, her family's worst fears began to unfold, and a case would stretch across decades. Who was responsible for ending Stephanie Isaacson's life, and how would the truth finally emerge? Stephanie Isaacson's story begins in 1974, when she was born in Nebraska. From her earliest years, she formed a deep bond with her father, a connection that stayed strong even as her parents' marriage ended. After the divorce, her family adapted to new arrangements, but Stephanie's closeness to her younger sister Joanne never wavered. Their relationship was tender and loyal, shaped by shared experiences and a love that carried through each stage of their young lives. Friends and family remember Stephanie as outgoing, cheerful, and full of energy. She had a natural warmth that made her approachable, and she built friendships easily. Music played a meaningful role in her life, and she loved to sing, often joining her school choir. Her enthusiasm for singing was something she enjoyed alongside Joanne, a shared passion that deepened their bond. Those who knew her describe her as someone who valued connection, always ready to make others feel included. In 1985, Stephanie moved to Las Vegas with her father after he was stationed at Nellis Air Force Base. Despite the change, she remained the same lively, caring teenager, adjusting to her new surroundings while keeping her family ties at the center of her life. She continued to look out for Joanne, and her loyalty was clear in everyday situations. One moment stands out. When friends planned a trip to the mall, Stephanie insisted her sister come along. When told Joanne could not join, Stephanie declined to go herself. To those around her, this was typical of her character, devoted, protective, and compassionate. These memories remind us that Stephanie was not just a name in a case, but a young girl who was deeply loved, full of life, and inseparable from the family and friends who cherished her. On the morning of June 1st, 1989, 14-year-old Stephanie Isaacson awoke around 6:30 a.m. and began preparing for another school day. She gathered her things and set out for El Dorado High School, a familiar routine she followed regularly. Her walk was usually short, and to save time she often took a shortcut across a vacant sand lot near Stewart Avenue and Lynn Lane. It was a path she knew well, and one she had walked before without incident. Stephanie's father, who worked overnight shifts as a staff sergeant at Nellis Air Force Base, was not at home that morning. She was used to getting herself ready while he worked, a responsibility she managed with maturity. That day appeared no different, and by all accounts, her morning began as ordinarily as any other. But when the school day ended and Stephanie had not returned home, her father's concern began to grow. At first, he considered the possibility that she might have stopped to spend time with friends, yet as the hours passed, worry turned quickly into alarm. Phone calls to the school revealed that she had never arrived in the first place. Teachers and staff confirmed she was absent all day, a fact that deepened the fear that something had gone terribly wrong. Her father reached out to authorities, and a missing persons report was filed. What began as a morning routine soon escalated into a desperate search, as family and investigators realized Stephanie had vanished on her way to school. Once the missing persons report was filed, Stephanie's father did not wait idly. Along with friends and neighbors, he began searching the familiar paths she might have taken, some even using horseback to cover more ground quickly. The community response was immediate, with people determined to find the young teenager who had set out for school that morning but never arrived. Law enforcement launched a full-scale search operation. Officers canvassed the area surrounding her usual route, and resources were expanded as urgency grew. Ground teams scoured the desert terrain, helicopters circled overhead, and K-9 units joined in to track any possible scent. Every effort reflected the growing fear that Stephanie was in danger. During the course of the search, investigators discovered several of her belongings scattered in a desert lot. Among them were school books, items she would not have abandoned willingly. This discovery confirmed suspicions that her disappearance was not voluntary. The focus shifted toward the likelihood that foul play was involved. Later that evening, one of the police K-9 units made the grim discovery. Stephanie's body was located approximately 25 yards from the path she typically used to reach school. She was partially concealed by brush, hidden just enough to delay detection until searchers moved closer. The shock was immediate and devastating. What began as a hopeful search for a missing teenager had become something far darker. In an instant, the case transitioned from a disappearance to a homicide investigation, setting the stage for years of unanswered questions. When investigators arrived at the desert lot where Stephanie's body had been discovered, the scene was treated with the utmost care. Officers quickly established a perimeter, ensuring that evidence would be preserved. Her body lay partially concealed beneath brush, but one detail stood out immediately. An orange carpet had been used to cover her. This striking and unusual element suggested a deliberate effort to hide her remains, and it became a focal point for forensic examination. Homicide detectives and crime scene investigators began carefully documenting the area. Photographs were taken from multiple angles, notes were compiled, and evidence was methodically collected under supervision. The coroner's investigator was summoned to oversee the removal of Stephanie's remains once the site was processed. Each step reflected the urgency to capture every detail, as investigators knew the crime scene itself was the most crucial witness. At the autopsy, the findings revealed the depth of the violence she had endured. Stephanie had been sexually assaulted, and she suffered significant blunt force trauma injuries. The medical examiner determined that the cause of death was strangulation. Her clothing was found in disarray, with her shirt pulled upward and her jeans pulled down, underscoring the brutality of the assault. Several personal items, including her shoes, were missing from the scene, adding to the evidence of foul play. The coroner's office officially ruled her death a homicide by strangulation. For her family, the confirmation was devastating. Their search for a missing daughter had ended in heartbreak. In the days that followed, funeral services were arranged, first in Las Vegas for friends and community members, and later in Nebraska, where she was laid to rest. Each service reflected the deep grief of loved ones mourning the loss of a 14-year-old whose life had been stolen. In the days following Stephanie Isaacson's death, detectives launched an intensive investigation. They canvassed the neighborhood around Stewart Avenue and Lynn Lane, questioning anyone who might have noticed unusual activity on the morning she disappeared. Investigators interviewed her friends, classmates, and teachers at El Dorado High School, hoping to uncover small details that could explain what had happened. One of the few early leads came from reports of an unknown vehicle parked near the area that morning. While promising at first, the information lacked crucial details. Witnesses were unable to identify the make, model, color, or license plate, leaving the lead too vague to follow with certainty. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit was consulted in hopes of developing a clearer picture of the suspect. Agents provided a general offender profile, but it was broad and did not lead to any specific person. Without witnesses to the crime and with limited forensic tools available at the time, investigators faced significant obstacles. Over the months and years that followed, detectives pursued numerous leads, even traveling to other states such as Washington, Ohio, and Texas to question potential suspects. Each effort, however, ended the same way, with no viable evidence tying anyone to the crime. Despite their determination, the case reached a standstill. The limitations of late 1980s forensic science meant investigators had little beyond circumstantial information. Without a suspect or conclusive evidence, the investigation slowed, and Stephanie's case gradually grew cold, though it was never forgotten by those committed to finding the truth. By the late 1990s, new scientific tools gave investigators another opportunity to re-examine the evidence collected in Stephanie Isaacson's case. In 1998, forensic experts tested samples taken from her clothing, but the results provided no usable profile. The evidence, degraded and limited, remained silent. Nearly a decade later, technology had advanced further, and investigators returned once again to the material preserved from the crime scene. In 2007, a team succeeded in recovering a partial DNA sample from Stephanie's shirt. The discovery offered hope, and the profile was entered into CODIS, the National DNA Database, yet no match was found. The disappointment was sharp. Even with identifiable DNA, the absence of a corresponding record meant investigators still had no suspect. For the detectives who had carried the case for years, the lack of progress was deeply frustrating. They had a trace of the person responsible, but the science and databases of the time could not transform that fragment into a name. The investigation remained open, but the trail was as elusive as ever. In 2018, the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department reorganized its cold case unit and reassigned Stephanie Isaacson's file to a new investigator. This fresh attention ensured the case would not remain forgotten and renewed hope that advancing technology could provide long-awaited answers. That same year, community support became a turning point. A nonprofit group called the Vegas Justice League, founded by Justin Wu, raised funds to support advanced forensic testing beyond law enforcement budgets. Stephanie's case was selected, and the evidence was sent to Othram, a Texas laboratory specializing in forensic genetic genealogy. The challenge was extraordinary. Investigators supplied only 120 picograms of DNA, about 15 human cells. Othram scientists applied forensic-grade genome sequencing, knowing the risk that consuming the sample could leave nothing for future analysis. Their work succeeded, producing the smallest DNA profile ever used to solve a homicide. From this fragment, a genealogical map was built, revealing French-Canadian ancestry from both New England and Canada. Though complex, careful analysis eventually produced investigative leads. After months of research, Othram returned results to detectives, marking a milestone in forensic science and offering the first real breakthrough in decades. Verification by the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department identified the suspect, Darren Roy Marchand. He had previously been arrested in 1986 for assault and murder of 24-year-old Nanette Vanderberg, though charges were dismissed for lack of evidence. Nearly 3 years later, he killed Stephanie. By 1995, Marchand had died by suicide at 29, ending the possibility of prosecution, but finally giving investigators and Stephanie's family an answer. Even so, the confirmation mattered deeply. Investigators who had pursued countless dead ends could finally close the file with certainty. For Stephanie's loved ones, the answer provided resolution to years of painful uncertainty. While true justice was out of reach, the truth had at last been uncovered. This outcome highlighted the progress of forensic science. Traditional methods had failed for decades, but advanced genetic genealogy succeeded. Darren Roy Marchand's name could finally be linked beyond doubt to Stephanie Isaacson's murder, closing one of Las Vegas's most haunting cold cases. The confirmation of Stephanie Isaacson's killer brought long-awaited answers, but it also carried painful truth. Stephanie's mother expressed relief that her daughter's case had been solved after decades, yet she acknowledged that justice could never be complete. With the suspect gone for years, no trial or sentence could restore what was taken. For investigators, the outcome demonstrated the extraordinary capability of modern forensic science. The identification had been achieved from only 120 picograms of DNA, a fraction equal to about 15 cells. It set a world record for the smallest amount ever used to solve a homicide through genetic genealogy, proving that even evidence once dismissed as too limited could still yield the truth. The case also emphasized the importance of protecting fragile forensic evidence. Specialists cautioned that sending DNA to unqualified or outsourcing laboratories could permanently damage material. In situations where only the smallest traces remain, precision in handling and analysis determines whether justice is possible. Another lesson came from the role of funding. Advanced sequencing is costly, and without community support, many cold cases remain untouched. In Stephanie's investigation, private donors ensured the work could proceed. Broader awareness and sustainable funding are critical to make these techniques accessible for families still waiting for answers. Stephanie's life ended far too early, but her case now stands as an example of persistence, science, and compassion converging. The work of detectives, forensic experts, and community members shows that even the faintest trace can carry a voice. For her family, the truth cannot erase the loss, but it closes decades of uncertainty and reinforces the hope that other families may also find long-denied answers.